Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students. This session focuses on the background of whole language method. I hope and expect by the end of this session, you would have an introduction to the whole language method, and you would also know some of the important aspects of its background. Well, my dear students, the term whole language was created in the 1980s by a group of US educators who were concerned with the teaching of language, that is, reading and writing in the native language. So I hope this very basic introduction gives you an idea of at least some idea of the nature of this method. The teaching of reading and writing in the first language, often termed the teaching of literacy, is a very active educational expertise worldwide. Like the field of second language teaching has led to a number of different approaches and methodologies. So in the teaching of writing, that is the teaching of literacy, there are various aspects and various approaches that are taken, that have been incorporated. One widespread approach to both the teaching of reading and writing has focused on a decoding approach to language. Now, this decoding approach focuses on teaching the separate components of language, such as grammar, vocabulary, and word recognition, and in particular, the teaching of phonics. Phonics is based on the theory that reading involves identifying letters and turning them into sounds. So, the process is that when a learner or a student is reading something through the identification of the letters, and by transmitting them or by changing them or turning them into the sounds, the learner would learn the sounds of that language. Other reading theories approach reading through skills. The whole language movement is strongly opposed to these approaches to teaching reading and writing, and it argues that language should be taught as a whole. So the whole language method, as the name itself suggests, it believes in and it proposes that the teaching of L2 should be based on a holistic approach where the language has to be taken as a whole, where the language has to be taken in its totality and not dealing with different components separately. If language isn't kept whole, it isn't language anymore, Rigg 1991 claims. Whole language instruction is a theory of language instruction that was developed to help young children learn to read and has also been extended to middle and secondary levels and to the teaching of English as second language or ESL. So what began as a holistic way to teach reading has become a movement for change, and key aspects of which are respect for each student as a member of a culture and as a creator of knowledge, and respect for each teacher as a professional. So everybody giving their due share of respect. This method emphasizes learning to read and write naturally. Now, this is an important part. It emphasizes reading and writing naturally with a focus on real communication and reading and writing for the purposes of pleasure. In the 1990s, it became popular in the United States. In language teaching, it shares a philosophical and instructional perspective with communicative language teaching. So there are a lot of overlappings and there are a lot of points of sharing, since it emphasizes the importance of meaning and meaning-making processes while teaching and learning. It also relates to natural approaches to language learning, since it is designed to help children and adults learn a second language in the same way that children learn their first language. Considerable discussion has been devoted to whether whole language is an approach, it is a method, a philosophy, or a belief. And if we look at how language is treated in a survey of 64 articles on whole language, Bergeron found whole language treated as an approach, which makes 34.4% of the articles, and as a philosophy in 23.4%, and as a belief in 14.1%, or as a method in 6.3%. But what I would like to point out is whether we treat it as a method or an approach or a belief or a philosophy, ultimately what we need to look at is that the proponents of whole language method have suggested a naturalistic approach towards the use of language in the process of teaching and learning in L2, and what they propose is that the process of language teaching and learning should consider language as a whole, not taking it into segments. Each whole language teacher implements the theories of whole language as he or she interprets them. So there can be variations when it comes to the interpretation of the theories. And according to the kinds of classes and according to the kinds of learners that a teacher is dealing with or is teaching, the teacher can interpret the basic concepts of whole language teaching. And irrespective of whether we call it a philosophy, we call it a method, or we call it just a belief, it takes a certain stance on the teaching of L2 to the learners by considering the totality of the language.